Hello everyone, this is Professor Calabata, and this is the PowerPoint presentation for Module 3. This presentation is going to be a little different because I want to click around on our Canvas page first for a few minutes before we actually get to the PowerPoint. Because I want to talk about the task that you have to do for Essay 3, which is a little different than the previous essays. Let's go down to our Module 3, click on Module 3. And let's go down to the essay assignment page. So I'm clicking here on the bottom, on the click here to go to the essay assignment page. The prompt is what privileges or disadvantages do you have because of the group or the groups you belong to. There's the prompt at the top of the page. And I've given you a long list of ideas that I'm hoping will help you start your brainstorming. Let's go down to the bottom of the page, the format requirements. It's similar to the previous essays. You see it's 3 to 5 pages, at least 3 full pages, double-spaced, 12-point font, 1-inch margins. That doesn't change. You have to use personal observations like you did in the previous essays. What's different this time is that you have to use at least 4 quotes from at least one source that you will find on your own from the Chaffey College database list. So I want you to start becoming familiar with the Chaffey College database list, and we're doing a little bit of research with this one. You can use more than one article if you want, but you have to use at least one article that you'll find on your own in the Chaffey College database list. So let's look at that. I'm going to click on the Chaffey College database list. I gave a link there. And so here's a list of all the databases that you have access to because you're a Chaffey College student. They are arranged in alphabetical order. I'm going to show you 2 databases for this essay that will probably do all the work for you that you need to get done for this essay assignment. Let's start with Academic Search Complete. There at the top, very first one at the A's. And let's just search, how about just male privilege? Search. And we'll have a number of articles that will pop up. I will tell you a couple of things that you might want to do here on the left. You see you can click on a couple of things here on the left. I like to click on full text because that means that all of the search results that you will find are articles where you can actually see the full text electronically, which means you won't have to go looking for the full text anywhere else. Publication date. Yeah, you should probably make it within the past 5 to 10 years. I didn't put that here, but that's probably a good idea. This one is in 2019. Let's just click on the one at the top. So as I said, I clicked on full text. So the full text of the article is available for me right here, which is very convenient. You see on the left side of the screen, there's a couple of things you can click on. You can email it to yourself. You can save it. There's also a citation tool that I want to talk about. So let's click on Cite. So let's say I wanted to use this article in my essay. I quoted the article several times in the body of my essay, and now I am making a works cited page. And I want to put the citation on the works cited page, which is something you have to do for Essay 3. I want you to make a works cited page. And in fact, let's start doing that. I have a blank Word document. So a works cited page should be its own page. You finish writing the essay should be at least 3 full pages, and then you go to the next page, a blank page. At the top, you put the words works cited. It should be 12-point font, and let's center it. It should be centered. And let's also make sure the spacing is correct, double spaced, and get rid of the spaces in between the paragraphs. Okay. Now we want to put our citation on our works cited page. So I clicked on the citation tool, scroll down to MLA, make sure I keep mentioning that the different citation systems look very similar, so make sure you're always clicking on the right one. So this is MLA, and the simplest thing that I like to do is I just highlight it, and then I press Control C, and then go to my Word document, go down to the next line, and press Control V to paste. And there it is, but you see we have to fix it up a little bit. You see this icon right here, Paste Options. Click on that little arrow, and you see it'll say Merge Formatting. Click on that, and now it has changed the format to the same sort of format as the words Works Cited at the top. So now the citation is now 12-point font with double spacing, which is what it's supposed to be. But you see it's also centered, which we don't want it to be. So go up here and you see the Align Left button. So click Align Left. And now a works cited page, think of it this way. Every citation on your works cited page is the opposite of what a regular paragraph is. A paragraph would indent the first line like that, and all the other lines would be on the margin. But on a works cited page, each citation, it's the opposite. Every line is indented except for the first line. So there is software you can use to do this for you, but again, I guess you can tell that I like doing it the easiest way possible. I just press Enter and then Tab, and then go down to the next line and tab. So now that's correct. The first line is on the margin, and then all the other lines are indented. And that's correct. You only have to use one source for essay 3. If you use multiple sources, then arrange the sources in alphabetical order according to the author's names. You see that the author's name is sticking out here on the margin. That's why every line is indented, so that if somebody looks at your works cited page, they can see the last names of the authors sticking out on the margin, arranged in alphabetical order down the margin, the left margin of the page. But again, all you need is one source for essay 3. So that's how you make a works cited page. Now let's go to our PowerPoint presentation. First couple of slides are about works cited pages and electronic sources, which I've already talked about to some extent, and then we'll get into the reading concepts. So again, works cited pages. You put the words works cited at the top, and then you put the entries underneath that, arranged in alphabetical order according to the last names of the authors that are sticking out at the margin. I hope you understand now why every line is indented except for the first line of each entry. It's so that you can see the last names of the authors sticking out in alphabetical order. It makes it easy to reference. The idea is that somebody can be reading your essay and they see you quoting material in the body of your essay, and after each quote you put the name of the author and the page number, and they want to check up on that source, so they flip to the last page, which is the works cited page, and they can just go down the left margin and easily find the last name of the author from the quote that they looked up in the body of your essay. In general, the citation format tends to follow this format: author, title, and publication information, with every piece of information separated by periods. And I understand I just showed you a citation tool that does everything for you, and you can just copy and paste it into your works cited page, which is great because it saves you a lot of time. But I would like you to be familiar with the general format: author, title, and publication information, even though I understand now that we have electronic citation tools, luckily you no longer have to type all this out yourself. But still, we're going to talk about it a bit because I want you to be familiar with the general format of how to cite things on a works cited page. Let's go to the next slide. So electronic sources, an article from an electronic database. Again, you see the author is going to be sticking out on the margin, last name first, period, the title of the article, and then the name of the database or website where you got the article. You see the title of the article is in quotation marks, and the title of the container, which means the database or the website, is in italics. The rule here is that small things that cannot stand on their own are in quotation marks. Larger things that can stand on their own are italics. So for instance, the name of a short story or the name of an article would be in quotation marks. The name of a novel would be in italics. So here we have the title of an article with a period separating it from the name of the database. The title of the article is in quotation marks, and then the name of the database is in italics. And then you have the publication information. The name of the publisher, which would be, like for instance, here, if you were going to do it, type it out by hand. The title of the container would be the database. The publisher would be the name of the organization or the institution that is maintaining the database, the date that it was published, and then at the end you also put the date you accessed it. Everything is separated by periods, and I gave a helpful link. I always give these little helpful links in the PowerPoint presentations. The helpful links here take us to the OWL Purdue, which I've talked about a couple of times throughout the semester. And this is the page that shows us how to cite electronic sources in our Works Cited page. I'm not going to read through all of this. Luckily, I know you're thankful that I'm not going to read through all of it. But I do want to point it out to you that it's a nice resource to look at. You can always look here to get details about how to cite things. You see on the left here, MLA, and it gives you a long list of how to cite things. I'd say get into the habit of looking at this website and looking up how to cite things and become familiar with it. Also, I keep mentioning, make sure you click on the right one. So we know it's MLA. We're in the right place. It's MLA. They also give APA, which is very convenient if you're in other classes. But again, I keep saying, make sure you click on the right page because MLA and APA can look very similar. And let's go back to our PowerPoint presentation. All right. So let's see. Electronic sources. Before we go on to the reading concepts, I just wanted to finish up a couple of ideas about the electronic sources. So we talked about one database, Academic Search Complete. We talked about how to make a works cited page, and I also showed you some of the OWL Purdue. I want to go back to the database list and just show you one more database. Opposing viewpoints under O. This is a nice database that does exactly what the title says. It's opposing viewpoints. And you can type in current controversial issues here, and it will give you various articles, and it'll sometimes give you a split screen, giving you pro-con arguments. Let's just type in one of our articles talks about transgender rights. So let's click transgender rights and see what we get. All right. So again, this database is nice because sometimes if you click on something that is a popular topic, it'll give you a start page here where it gives you an overview. And then down here, it will give you featured viewpoints. Over here, you have academic journals. And it's basically a one-stop shopping place for a particular topic. You have all these articles here. This one, if you were doing research on transgender rights, this one page probably has all the research you need. So I just wanted to show that to you. I think those two databases will do all the work for you for this one particular essay assignment. So Academic Search Complete and Opposing Viewpoints. Stay inside those two databases. And we're going to talk more about research in Essay 4, and I'll kind of go into more detail about why I want you to stay within the databases when we get to Essay 4. For now, Academic Search Complete, Opposing Viewpoints, and How to Make a Works Cited page. That's pretty good for Essay 3. So let's go back to our PowerPoint presentation again, and let's start talking about the reading assignment concepts. One of the videos in this unit that I wanted you to watch is made by a person called Desha Hockett, and it's about implicit bias, which you might have heard of before. I tried to outline his ideas from his video here. It might be helpful to look at these ideas maybe before and after you look at his video. But I feel that we can break it down into a couple of pieces here. First of all, he defines what implicit bias is, and he says there are three characteristics. Implicit bias operates on a subconscious level, which is very important to understand. We'll be talking about this more as time goes on, a little bit in 1A, and I talk about it more in English 1B. There's this strange idea that we don't know all of the activity that is going on inside our brain, which is a strange idea when many people come in contact with it. It's the idea that my brain is doing lots of things that I am not consciously aware of. And that raises larger philosophical implications, like the fact that I am a stranger to myself, that it takes work for me to get to know myself so that I understand what my brain is doing. We'll be coming back to that again. It's an odd idea that for many people, but it's important to remember that there's lots of stuff going on inside your brain that you are not consciously aware of. And so this is one of the important things for us to remember. Implicit bias operates on a subconscious level. It's there, but we're not consciously aware that it's there. The second point there, that it runs contrary to our conscious beliefs. So on a conscious level, we have an idea of what type of person we are and what our ideas are and why we do what we do. But then on the subconscious level, there's other stuff going on that often runs in the opposite direction. So again, I mentioned a few minutes ago that we are strangers to ourselves, that we have to do work to understand what's going on that subconscious level, and that the conscious level and the subconscious level are often moving in two opposite directions. And that the third point there, the bias results in rapid and automatic mental associations. So it's instinctive. We see someone and we have an immediate response to them. Our subconscious is shaping how we respond to them without us being consciously aware of how or why we are responding to them. Hockett goes on to make a couple more points. Why it's important to address implicit bias. He says, understanding implicit bias gives us an expanded diagnosis of the problem. So it's important to understand the distinction between implicit and explicit bias. We often talk about prejudice as being something that is explicitly harmful, and it is. A mean person is getting in your face and being mean to you in an explicit way. But it's also important to remember that a lot of harm that we can cause other people is done in an implicit way, where our words and our actions are causing harm to people in a way that we did not intend. And so we'll be coming back to that again. Intent versus impact. And so the point number 2 there, understanding implicit bias allows us to be predictive and preventive. So again, I was mentioning intent versus impact in the first point. If we understand the impact that we're having on people without having the intent to cause harm to them, we can prevent ourselves from causing that harm before we actually do it. If we don't make an attempt to understand what is going on inside ourselves on a subconscious level, then we are probably causing harm to other people around us without being consciously aware that we're doing it while we're doing it. So understanding implicit bias can prevent bad situations from happening in the first place. And that's an important point to make, because Hackett makes the argument that our society does make an attempt to address these types of problems associated with prejudice, but the systems we put in place tend to be reactive, meaning they tend to be about reacting to a bad situation that has already happened, rather than having a system in place that tries to prevent bad things from happening in the first place. The third point is important because it's about reducing shame, or maybe even anger and aggression. In the next 2 slides, we're going to be talking about emotions and what people feel when they are confronted with their own implicit bias. Before we go on to the next slide, it's important to touch back on a couple of these ideas. Remember, implicit bias is on a subconscious level. And something else to remember is that implicit bias is universal. In other words, you cannot be a human being without having implicit bias in you. So that's important to remember, because when people are confronted with their implicit bias, they can often feel very uncomfortable. Most of us don't want to be hurtful towards other people. We don't want to be prejudiced. We don't want to be racist or sexist or homophobic. And so when we are confronted with our implicit bias, it forces us to reevaluate our perception of ourselves. Remember, the stuff going on the subconscious level in your mind is often running in the opposite direction of the stuff that's going on the conscious level in your mind. So on a conscious level, you have a perception of yourself as being a nice person that wants to get along with other people around you. But on the subconscious level, there's stuff going on that we often don't feel very proud of, and that we might feel afraid to confront. And if other people point it out to us, we can often feel very uncomfortable. We can feel scared, we can feel angry, because the stuff going on the subconscious level in our mind is forcing us to reevaluate how we think of ourselves. And that can be a very uncomfortable experience. But Hackett, in his video, is trying to make the point that, remember, you cannot be a human being without having implicit bias in you. And that understanding can have the effect of reducing shame. So instead of a person being confronted with their implicit bias and being made to feel bad about it, Hackett wants us to look at implicit bias as something that we all have and we can all work together to reduce. So shame is not necessarily a constructive thing to feel. We'll talk more about that in the next slide. I put a link here that says Project Implicit, and that's a website run by Harvard, and it's basically a series of tests. I'll go down here. You can, if you're interested, you can look at this. It says I wish to proceed. So here's a list of tests, and it's basically a list of tests and questionnaires that they give you. Each one takes about, I think, 10 or 15 minutes. But you can see it will test you for your implicit bias. Like, do you have implicit bias against gay people? Do you have implicit bias against Arab Muslim people? Do you have implicit bias based on skin tone? And it's interesting. I don't require you to take any of these tests, but it can be an interesting experience to take some of these tests to try to identify some of your implicit bias. And remember, uh, I've taken a number of these tests, and it was very enlightening for me to see my own implicit bias. We keep coming back to this. Implicit bias is on a subconscious level. We're not consciously aware of it. Your society has conditioned you to have it. You can't be a human being without having implicit bias in you. So if you accept that, it can be a little bit easier to confront your own implicit bias. But I keep coming back to the idea it's normal to feel very uncomfortable about being confronted with your implicit bias. Let's talk a little bit more about that. So, two uncomfortable conclusions we're likely to feel when we analyze our privilege. Uh, so, implicit bias and privilege are linked with each other. What is privilege? The fact of the matter is, the modern world we live in is governed by layers of systems. Our political system, our economic system, our cultural system, our criminal justice system, and all of these systems are set up to make things easier for some people and more difficult for other people. The reason for that is because people in the past made certain decisions when these systems were being built in our history. People in the past made certain decisions to build these systems in a certain way so that they were beneficial to some people and harmful to others. It would have been nice if people in the past had made different choices, but they didn't. They made the choices they did, and so this is the systems that we've inherited. But the systems that govern our lives are set up to make things easier for some people and more difficult for other people. And if I recognize that I'm one of the people that has special privileges within that system, it can make me feel very uncomfortable. Maybe the first thing that I'm going to think of is maybe I cannot claim total ownership of all of the achievements in my life. I'm going to give a personal story really quick. Well, it's not my story. I heard a history professor, a female history professor, saying a number of years ago, she talked about what it was like for her to become a female history professor. And she said that when she was a younger woman, she told her family that she wanted to be a history professor. And her father told her, well, if you want to be a teacher, you could teach kindergarten, but teaching college, that's a man's job. Now, eventually, she went on to become a history professor, so the story has a happy ending. But the truth is, we do have to think about how many young women out there received that sort of negative feedback from family, from friends, from romantic partners, from neighbors. There's just a cultural system in place that says that women do some things and men do other things. And how many young women wanted to do things in life like become history professors, but they didn't because they were receiving so much negative feedback like that. So as a man, I do have a responsibility to acknowledge that the systems that govern our lives are set up to make things easier for me. And that I'm very proud of the fact that I'm a history professor. And I'm very proud of my achievements. I worked very hard to become to become an English professor. But I do have to acknowledge the fact that because the system is set up to make things easier for me, I probably didn't have to work as hard along the way in order to get the things that I have. So, for instance, if how many other young women out there wanted to be college professors, but they didn't because of that sort of negative feedback that one of my colleagues had? That situation probably has resulted in somebody like me, a man, having less competition to become a college professor. So somebody's disadvantage is my advantage. I have special privileges because things are difficult for other people that are different than me. And that's a difficult thing for me to accept, but I have a responsibility to try to understand it and accept it. The second point here, Privilege allows me to remain oblivious to my own implicit bias. If I make no effort to become aware of my implicit bias, then I'm causing harm to others. So uh, I think that women are justified in being angry about male privilege. And I do think that the women around me would be justified in being angry at me personally if I was not making an effort to understand how male privilege has shaped my life and how male privilege has shaped the way I see the world. So maybe it is sort of a situation where I'm either part of the solution or I'm part of the problem. If I'm not making an effort to understand how male privilege has shaped the way I see the world, then I am most definitely going to be, uh, uh, my words and actions are going to be shaped by my implicit bias that I have not made an effort to try to understand. And so I'm going to be having a negative impact on people, even if I am not on a conscious level trying to cause harm to people. And that's something that I have to be aware of. I have to be aware of how privilege has shaped me and how privilege has given me implicit bias against other people that are different than me in the environment where I'm working. So a few important points about emotions. I, somebody in the field of psychology told me this one time. There's no such thing as good or bad emotions. There are comfortable and uncomfortable emotions. So we don't want to say that emotions are good or bad, because if we say an emotion is bad, then that's sort of a value claim. I'm telling myself that I shouldn't feel that emotion if it's a bad emotion. We want to tell ourselves that all emotions are acceptable. Okay. And because the subject matter for this assignment can make people feel very uncomfortable. It can make them feel sad or scared or angry if they are understanding that they either have disadvantages or if they are somebody who has special privileges and they're starting to feel uncomfortable about being confronted with that. But it's important to remember that uncomfortable experiences can lead to personal growth. Remember Plato's allegory of the cave in the previous essay assignment. When that person comes out of the cave, the light hurts their eyes, they feel a lot of confusion, but they're in a process of education. They're in a process of personal growth. And that's a positive thing. They're becoming more than they used to be. But the fact of the matter is, remember, one of the lessons about the allegory of the cave was that personal growth is not always a comfortable experience. It can be very uncomfortable. And so we have to try to acknowledge that to ourselves. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay to feel angry or sad or scared, and it's okay to talk about that. If you're one of the people with disadvantages or privileges, I mentioned my own experience from the previous slide, where as a man, I have a responsibility to acknowledge that I have special privileges. And that can be an uncomfortable experience because maybe it means that I can't own all of the achievements in my life that I thought I could. I've worked hard, but still some things were easier for me compared to other people. And my advantages are built on top of other people's disadvantages. So those types of realizations are going to force a person to look in the mirror and reevaluate their sense of self. And that, in the end, is a positive experience of personal growth, but it can be very uncomfortable. And it's okay if it feels uncomfortable, and it's okay to talk about it. But remember, positive experiences of growth are not always comfortable experiences, and it's okay to feel uncomfortable. So, and remember, the other point that I put here, every emotion is a message telling you to do something. So comfortable emotions are usually telling us to keep on doing what we're doing. Uncomfortable emotions are a message telling us that something needs to change. If I'm angry, if I'm sad, I'm scared, those are uncomfortable emotions that are sending me a message that I need to change something. And remember what Hockett said in his video. Shame is not necessarily a positive thing to do. Shame, in fact, I just mentioned a few minutes ago, there are no good or bad emotions. some people argue that shame is not actually an emotion, it's more of a thinking. It's thoughts about uh, about I shouldn't feel or think a certain way. Shame is a way of shutting down emotions that might be uncomfortable emotions, but are leading you in a positive direction. So sometimes when we're confronted with our own privilege, when we're confronted with our own implicit bias, we can feel shame, or we can actually get angry and aggressive towards people around us that are exposing our implicit bias or our privilege to us. And those are not, shame and aggression will not lead down a path of positive personal growth. So if we are confronted with our privilege and uh, our implicit bias, if we feel sad, shame and aggression are preventing us from feeling that sadness. If we feel sad, if we feel uncomfortable because we feel culpable or responsible for other people's suffering, other people's inability to progress in life, that is an uncomfortable thing, but it can lead down a positive path. And shame or aggression are shutting down those uncomfortable emotions so that we are going to keep doing the same thing without going through positive change. So it's important to think about which state of mind is constructive and leads towards action that makes things better. So, okay, so some brainstorming for essay one. Essay three. Essay three is asking you to figure out what advantages or disadvantages you have because of the group you belong to. So first of all, make a diagram of yourself. Make a couple of concentric circles. In the middle, try to make a list of words that describe who you are as a unique person, things that are unique to you that you don't share with other people. Personality traits, maybe hobbies or interests, maybe experiences you've had in life. In the next circle out, try to make a list of things that you have in common with some people, but not everybody. So this is where maybe your ethnicity, your racial identity, religion, gender, your gender identity, maybe sexual orientation. And then in the last circle, try to make a list of words that you have in common with all people. So for instance, we've been talking about implicit bias. Implicit bias is something you have in common with all people. You can't be a human being without having implicit bias. The last circle will be things having to do with human nature, human behavior, maybe wants and needs, desires. We all want shelter. We all need to eat food. We all want to feel safety and security. We all want to avoid harm. We want to feel emotional connections with other people around us. So there's some things we have in common with all human beings on the planet. So spend some time with that. Try to fill in as many things in each circle as you can, and then maybe make a little chart for yourself. I mean, it doesn't have to look as nice like this, like on a computer screen, but you can just do it on scratch paper. Try to get each trait that you thought of in the previous exercise with the circles, and try to think about what advantages or disadvantages each trait gives you. So for instance, Peggy McIntosh in her article, she talks about being a white person. She also talks about what it's like being a woman. And so I put those two traits up here. Peggy McIntosh, she talks about being a white person. She gave a pretty extensive list of advantages that she has as a white person. In the next row down, you can see that she also talked about what it's like being a woman, and she does talk about some disadvantages that she has because she's a woman. Another note I put down there at the bottom: how can your knowledge about implicit bias help you identify more advantages or disadvantages because of different aspects of your identity? How might a person face discrimination that is subtle or difficult to see because of implicit bias? So, if you're a white person, if you're male, if you're a heterosexual person, if you're a cisgender person, cisgender, CISGENDER, that means that you have a gender identity that fits with the gender identity that you were assigned at birth, as opposed to a transgender person who has a gender identity that is different than the gender identity they were assigned at birth. So, if you're a cisgender, if you're heterosexual, if you're a white person, if you're a man, the system is set up to make things easier for you. And that also means that the system has, without us being consciously aware of it, our cultural system has given us a worldview that shapes our implicit bias on a subconscious level. And an interesting thing about implicit bias that I didn't put in here is that even people who have a disadvantage in the system can have implicit bias against their own group. So, for instance, it is possible for instance, a female manager to have implicit bias against other female employees without being consciously aware that she's doing it while she's doing it. So implicit bias is not just on a subconscious level in the mind of a person who has special privileges. Implicit bias, the same implicit bias of the privileged person, can also be in the mind of a disadvantaged person. People who are discriminated against can discriminate against other people, and they can even discriminate against people who are members of their own group. So after you make those couple of charts, you kind of do the same thing we were doing in the other essays. By now, maybe you see a pattern. Do you notice that one of the skills you want to have, not just in writing, but in life in general, is you want to be able to make lots of observations. You want to be very observant, make lots of observations, and then you want to be able to pull the observations together to see a larger picture. How are all the observations pieces of a larger puzzle? Make lots of observations and then try to draw a larger conclusion from those observations. And that larger conclusion, that larger idea, that larger lesson will start turning into a thesis statement. Try to make your thesis, I think did I make a mistake with some of the wording there? Try to make sure your thesis gives us a larger opinion or message or lesson. All right, that's correct. And then after that, go through your observations and try to make an outline for your essay. Remember, I keep talking about the support sandwich. You want to be doing the double-decker support sandwich in this one. So try to make at least one connection in each section of your essay. Try to connect one quote from an article that you found on your own to at least one personal observation in each section of your essay. And remember, the bottom of the double-decker sandwich, that bottom piece of bread where you talk about and interpret that piece of support, you also want to talk about how these two pieces of support, your observation and the quote, how do they connect to form a larger idea about something? And I keep saying this, when you take ideas from one source and connect it to ideas from another source, you create new information. And that's another skill that you want to be doing, not just in this class, but all your classes and in life in general. So make lots of observations, draw conclusions from those observations, and try to connect different pieces of support to form new ideas. All right? And that's our PowerPoint presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be in office hours. And good luck on Essay 3.